Observer. If you have opened this video, it is because something within you already suspects everything you see. You feel a strange weariness around people. You look into the eyes of those who say they love you and perceive a void you cannot name. You smile at family dinners, answer messages, keep up appearances, and something deep in your psyche screams that it is all fake. You are not crazy. You are waking up. What society calls paranoia, excessive sensitivity, or emotional coldness, Carl Jung called individuation. It is the exact moment when your psyche begins to reject an epidemic of collective unconsciousness. And when this process begins, there is no turning back. Today I will show you the day you disappear and finally see people for what they truly are. Not for what they say they are, not for what they promise, for what remains of them when you stop being of use. You have never related to anyone. This is the uncomfortable truth your mind has been protecting for decades. You have never touched another person's soul. You have only touched the image you constructed of them inside your own head. The human psyche functions as a relentless projector. You meet someone at any given moment, in a specific circumstance, and within a few seconds, your mind builds an entire figure from fragments. A smile, a gentle word, a gesture of attention. Upon these pieces, you project loyalty, kindness, intelligence, affection, depth, and you begin to relate not to the person, but to the character you invented for them. Jung realized this with brutal clarity. He used to say that everything that is unconscious in us, we encounter in the world as fate. What you do not see within yourself, you project onto the other. If you need a father, any firm man becomes a father. If you need salvation, any convincing voice becomes a messiah. If you need affection, any touch on the right wound becomes love. This is the reason why you fall in love in 3 days with someone you barely know. This is the reason why you trust people who haven't yet had time to prove anything. This is the reason why you feel betrayed when you discover that the real person does not correspond to the fantasized person. That is why it is so common to say that phrase, "I thought I knew this person." You never did. You knew a version assembled with pieces of emotional need, and as long as reality does not contradict this image, everything seems harmonic. Everything seems like love. Everything seems like friendship. Everything seems like family. But the real always ends up escaping through the cracks. Small signs begin to appear. A curt response at a moment when you expected care. A gesture of indifference in the face of your own fragility. A silence where there was once presence. A forgetting on the exact day you most needed to be remembered. And then the mind panics, because the character it created begins to crumble before your eyes. True pain never comes from betrayal. True pain comes from the collapse of fantasy. You do not cry for the person you lost. You cry for the image you created and that never truly existed. This is the cruelest point of consciousness. When someone abandons you, betrays you, pulls away, or simply reveals who they have always been, your mind enters a brutal process of mourning. But the mourning is not for the person. The mourning is for the illusion that sustained your internal balance, for the narrative that gave meaning to your daily life, for the character you needed that person to be in order for your life to make sense. And that is why it hurts so much. Because by dismantling this image, you are forced to look at an even more disturbing truth. You were relating to a creation of your own, alone, in an internal dialogue disguised as a relationship. The small signs were always there. The coldness disguised as shyness, the lack of interest disguised as tiredness, the inconsistency disguised as a difficult phase, the absence disguised as personality, reserved. You saw it. You felt it. But your psyche chose to ignore it, because maintaining the fantasy was less painful than admitting that you were alone even when surrounded by people. And when the collapse finally happens, something in you changes forever. You can never look at a relationship the same way again. Naivety dies, and what is born in its place is a silent vigilance, a cold eye that begins to observe behaviors without letting itself be carried away by words anymore. This is the first sign of individuation. Painful, yes, but it is the only way. If you are feeling this collapse now, if you are realizing that many of the relationships that sustained your life were projections that have crumbled, know that this is not the end. It is the beginning. It is your psyche forcing your consciousness to look at what it has hidden for years. That is why I prepared the Código do Despertar for you. It is your psyche's instruction manual, built upon the profound concepts of Carl Jung, with 60 days of daily lessons for you to break free from paralysis, go through this collapse, and understand who you really are behind the masks. You will learn to recognize internal signals you have always ignored, dissolve invisible noises that dominate your decisions, integrate your shadow, and shield yourself against emotional manipulation. The link is in the first pinned comment of this video. Before you continue, leave a comment with the word Despertar. This is your first act of commitment to the truth. Now pay attention, because what follows is the part that bothers people the most. When you pull away, when you go silent, when you disappear, something profoundly revealing happens around you. The masks begin to fall off on their own. Silence is the cruelest mirror of social life. As long as you are available, attending, listening, validating, offering advice, presence, attention, and money, everyone seems to love you. You are the pillar, the confidant, the solution, the dear person, the eternally available one. But the moment you fall silent, when you withdraw your energy, when you stop serving as an emotional crutch, the spell is broken, and you begin to observe reactions that were previously hidden under the stage. Some simply vanish, as if your existence only made sense while you were feeding them. They don't reach out to you, they don't ask how you are. They disappear as if they never cared because, deep down, they never did. What looked like love was access, and without access, there is no bond. Others go into control mode, trying to find out what you are doing, who you are talking to, why you have changed. They send messages disguised as concern, but the real goal is to decipher your absence. They want to know if you have found someone else to serve. They want to ensure that you are still within reach. Others still reappear from time to time, opportunistically, when they need something, feigning affection that never existed, with that "I was thinking of you" type of message, when in truth they were thinking of what you used to do for them. And it is in this silence that you begin to make the most accurate reading that exists regarding human beings. You start to understand relationships by the behavior in your absence, not by the words in your presence. People who truly loved you stay close, without demands, without blackmail, without the need for explanation. They respect your silence. People who depended on you disappear, and their absence is so clean that it even feels strange. People who used you reappear with new demands disguised as longing. Jung said that the truth about a person is not in what they show when you are looking. It is in what they do when you disappear. And this simple shift in perspective is capable of reorganizing your entire emotional life in a few months. But to understand why this happens, it is necessary to go a little deeper. It is necessary to look at the invisible machine that moves entire social life. The masks. The word that Jung used was persona. The persona is the face you present to the world to be accepted, hired, loved, validated, tolerated. Everyone has one. The problem is that many people no longer know where the mask ends and the person begins. Have you ever noticed how an individual changes completely depending on the environment they are in? At work, they are firm and restrained. At home, they are irritable and distant. With friends, they are fun and generous. With people of higher status, they are submissive and soft. With people of lower status, they are arrogant and curt. Who is this person really? The answer is harsh. Nobody knows, perhaps not even they themselves. This is the fate of those who never confront themselves. Identity fragments into performative pieces, each glued to a context, and the real self remains buried somewhere deep down, forgotten. Over time, the person stops knowing who they are. They only know who they need to be so that people keep liking them. They only know which buttons to push in each environment. They wake up on autopilot, perform the role of the day, and fall asleep exhausted without understanding why. And that is why so many reach their 40s or 50s with that feeling of emptiness. It is not clinical depression. It is the silent realization that they lived an entire life playing roles and lost the chance to inhabit themselves. You can recognize these people in your circle. They are the ones who change their opinion according to the dominant opinion in the group, who laugh at jokes they detest, who defend causes in public and despise them in private, who hug you in front of others and ignore you when no one is looking. who post profound phrases on social media and treat the waiter poorly at the restaurant, who say they love their family and can barely stand to be alone with them for 10 minutes. And the most disturbing thing is to realize at some point that you also do this, that your persona also operates on autopilot, that there are entire parts of you that exist only to be accepted, that you also smile when you want to cry, agree when you want to disagree, stay when you want to leave. And that is where the real work begins. If this perception is piercing through you right now, do not let it pass as just another pretty reflection. O Código do Despertar was made exactly for this instant, the moment you realize you have lived as a collage of characters. It is 60 days of daily lessons for you to rebuild your real identity, based on the psychology of Jung. The link is in the first pinned comment. Decide now, before this lucidity evaporates. And when the masks begin to fall, another layer reveals itself. Invisible emotional contracts. Practically every human relationship functions on a silent agreement, and almost no one knows they signed it. You think your friendship with that person exists because you like each other, but observe calmly, what do they seek in you? Validation, advice, company so as not to feel their own emptiness, attention when others vanish, an audience for their own dramas. And what do you seek in them? To feel important, to feel necessary, to have someone to listen to your pains, to have a witness to your own existence. I am not saying that every relationship is self-interested in the vulgar sense of the word. I am saying something more subtle and more unsettling. Most human relationships are driven by unconscious needs and not by pure affection. Love disguises control. Friendship disguises dependency. Care disguises fear of being alone. Loyalty disguises the inability to change. Generosity disguises the need to be admired. Protection disguises the desire to keep the other person small. These contracts work as long as each side fulfills its role. You remain available, they remain needy. You remain listening, they remain dumping. You remain solving, they remain asking. Everything seems harmonious. But the day you break the contract, the day you say no, the day you set a boundary, the day you prioritize yourself, the disguise falls. And you discover with horror that what seemed like love was utility. What seemed like friendship was convenience. What seemed like care was control. People's reaction to a simple no reveals more about them than 10 years of living together. Those who love you accept your no even if they feel sad. Those who used you attack you, blame you, blackmail you, accuse you of having changed, and remind you of everything they have ever done for you. It is an infallible yardstick, and when you start using it, you quickly realize who is by your side by choice, and who was there out of custom, interest, or habit. But here comes the most uncomfortable part, the one nobody wants to hear. You do it too. You also project, you also manipulate, even if subtly. You also have a shadow. Jung called the shadow everything we reject within ourselves. What we deny, what we hide, what we repress. Envy, anger, ego, the desire for control, vanity, pettiness, vindictiveness, jealousy, resentment. Everyone has them. Those who deny them live dominated by these forces without realizing it, and still consider themselves good beneath that denial. And the mechanism of the shadow is treacherous. What you cannot see in yourself, you see with absurd clarity in others. You get irritated by someone else's arrogance, but you don't notice your own. You condemn others' manipulation, but you don't see the small manipulative acts you commit every day. You accuse the other of selfishness, but you don't see your own umbilical center. You criticize those who seek approval without realizing that each of your choices is a silent way of seeking approval as well. That is why Jung said a phrase that is almost unbearable to accept. What irritates you most in others is, almost always, a part of yourself that you have not yet recognized. The person who drives you crazy is mirroring something you deny. This is the hardest work in human life, to look at the shadow, to accept that there is a petty, jealous, ambitious, selfish, manipulative side of you, and that denying it only makes it stronger. True consciousness is not born from thinking oneself good. It is born from admitting that one is capable of the same things one condemns in others, that there is a small tyrant inside you, a small liar, a small coward, a small envious person, and only by recognizing this can you choose not to be dominated by them. And when you begin to do this work, something strange happens. You stop hating people, not because they have become better, but because you begin to recognize in each of their behaviors dynamics that also exist in you. Instead of judging, you understand. Instead of reacting, you observe. And that is where true transformation begins. When consciousness expands, the way you look at the world completely flips. Before you reacted to isolated events. Now, you read patterns. Before you were hurt by words. Now you observe behaviors. Before you believed in promises. Now you expect consistency. And this simple change makes it impossible to turn back. You can no longer ignore signs. You can no longer accept repeated excuses. You can no longer romanticize relationships that clearly do not serve you. Naivety dies, and in its place is born a cold lucidity, which protects you without making you bitter. You start evaluating people by what they do over time, not by what they say in a beautiful moment. A promise is worth zero. A sequence of small, coherent actions is worth everything. Words become just the wrapper. You read the content, and by doing this, you naturally shrink the circle. Some people leave. You don't kick them out. They simply lose access. You stop returning the energy they demanded. You stop carrying conversations that go nowhere. You stop offering presence to those who only listen to you in order to respond. You stop serving as an audience for monologues disguised as friendship. And in compensation, the rare people who remain start to carry enormous weight. You begin to deeply feel the value of a single, coherent, present, loyal person. Something that was once diffuse, scattered across dozens of superficial connections, now concentrates on a few true relationships. And you realize that this is what is called human quality. This is the exact moment you need to decide. Continue living on autopilot, repeating the same emotional patterns that brought you here, or take responsibility for completing the crossing. O Código do Despertar was built exactly for this point. It is not just another course, it is the instruction manual for your psyche. 60 days of daily lessons, each with a key, a question, and a declaration based on the core concepts of Carl Jung. You read, perform the proposed micro-action, and record your reflection in the journal. This is the practical path to individuation, to integrating the shadow, to shielding yourself against narcissistic manipulation, to deciphering the hidden language of dreams, and finally, to becoming who you really are behind all the masks. The link is in the first pinned comment. You already know what you need to do. Act now, before life pushes you back into unconsciousness. And then comes the most difficult and most liberating moment of this process, loneliness. When you start to see all this, when the projections fall, when the masks are revealed, when emotional contracts are broken, when the shadow begins to be integrated, an inevitable thing happens. You distance yourself, not because you hate anyone, not because you are depressed, not because you have become a bad person, but because it is unbearable to keep pretending after having seen what you have seen. It is unbearable to sit at the table and hear the same silent lies. It is unbearable to maintain conversations that you know are a performance. It is unbearable to smile at those you know are faking it. And this initial loneliness is uncomfortable. It is a silence that scares you. You find yourself staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of a lifetime built upon relationships that were not what they seemed. You find yourself reviewing old memories, translating gestures, reinterpreting conversations, and each new reading brings a pang of sadness mixed with lucidity. You notice things you didn't notice before. You feel the ridicule of so many situations where you gave yourself entirely to those who never wanted you entirely. But if you cross this valley without getting distracted, without running back to the same arms as before, without looking for new characters to fill the void, something changes in you. Loneliness ceases to be loneliness. It becomes solitude. It becomes presence with yourself. It becomes that strange stillness in which you simply are, without needing to perform, without needing to please, without needing to be someone. You discover, perhaps for the first time in your life, who you are when no one is watching. And in this process is born what Jung called individuation, the separation between the true identity and the identity built to be accepted. The end of a life lived in the name of the gaze of others. The beginning of a life lived in the name of one's own consciousness. The clarity that emerges is cold. It is not bitterness. It is not cynicism. It is not anger. It is stable lucidity. You start to look at people with understanding, but without illusion. You start to relate when it makes sense, and to distance yourself when it doesn't, without guilt, without drama, without the need for explanation. And that is exactly where you become inaccessible to what has always hurt you, not because you built walls, but because you began to inhabit a layer of consciousness that manipulation cannot reach. This is the day you disappear, and it is the day you are born. You can close this video now and go back to your usual life. Keep calling your paralysis patience. Keep calling your emotional dependence love. Keep pretending you don't see what you have already seen, but you won't forget, never again. The seed has already been planted and it will germinate with or without your permission. The link is in the first pinned comment. The choice is yours. Decide.